gym this morning. Cheers.
Cheers, buddy.
You had tiger's blood before?
I haven't had tiger's blood yet. I don't think. First sip.
Oh, wow. That's good.
That is good.
I like that.
Unlike any other blood that I've tasted.
Have you had other tiger's blood?
I don't think I've had tiger's blood in an energy drink before.
So what's the difference between regular coconut and tiger's blood? Because it tastes like it's not going to be coconut, and then the coconut hits right in the
There's
middle.
something else in the front, right? Is it like a strawberry or some type of fruity?
I think it's,
flavor?
yeah, that's what it's got to be.
I don't know why I'm looking at
tropical.
the can. I know the can doesn't say. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm definitely the coconut. Maybe some watermelon or strawberry aspect.
Yeah, it's good.
I'm gonna give it an 8.5.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it an 8.2.
Nice.
Yeah.
Not too in your face. Some energy drinks are pretty intense.
That's very drinkable.
It is. That could be a daily driver for sure. I don't know if I'd want a daily drive in the grill of mine, but you could.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get to the bottom of why that messes you up more than other people. I think it's probably the dopamine side of things.
You think so?
I think like the tyrosine that's in there, that's not in the ghost, and then the uridine, which are both like dopamine drivers.
So the dopamine system is just spent afterwards? Or?
You're just maybe getting more of an influx. Or it's the 400 of alpha GPC. Some people don't like that much alpha GPC. Or the huperzine. Honestly, it could be a few of these different things.
Possibly a combination?
I've had people that reacted negatively to pretty much all of those.
With the huperzine in particular, if I'm not mistaken, I think the first form energy drinks have like 20 micrograms.
And that's got 200?
That has 200.
Yep. Because the thing is, like the huperzine drives some of its own cognition stuff, right?
Okay.
But it pretty much amplifies everything else. So it's going to make everything more effective and last twice as long. So the caffeine and all the other nootropics in there. But anyway.
Yeah, not
welcome
talking.
to
Not
the Forging Alpha podcast.
Not just talking about energy drinks, also talking about fitness, mindset, motivation, lifestyle design, nutrition, and everything that kind of goes into forging an awesome existence.
Welcome.
What
are we talking about today?
We're talking about not finding balance, but the act of balancing throughout life, right?
Big difference.
There's a big difference. Let's jump into kind of what that difference is.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, when they talk about, you need to have balance in your life. And that's something clicked for me when I heard this the other day, that you do need to be finding balance, but there's never going to be a set point where you're going to have balance in your life. It's always an active thing. So like if you stand on one leg, you're never going to be balanced. You're always shifting your weight left to right, actively balancing multiple things. And I think that's a big thing where people think they're going to hit this euphoria in the top of the mountain with a balanced life and that everything's just going to be smooth sailing from there.
I thought that's where I was
happen.
headed. Is that not the case?
I haven't found it. I don't know anybody that's found it. So
No.
unless you have, maybe somebody that's sold their business and living in Costa Rica in a hut and just living at the beach all day, you might be able to have a balanced life once you've hit that point. But until then, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. And I think it's really important when you're thinking about balance in general to consider not just the daily breakdown of your time allocation, because I think that's really what it kind of comes down to is what you allocate your times towards or time towards. And where we're at in life, it's oftentimes going to be a lot heavier on the business side with ideally that kind of waning down in the future. But regardless, I think it's important to look at least like your balance per week or even per month and not just like your day-to-day balance.
Yes. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, but what does that even look like? With what does balancing life look like? Because I feel like most people, if you are not intentional with allocations or priorities and acknowledging what that actually is, you end up not balancing things because the acknowledgement of what you actually need to be balancing falls out of whack. And that's where you get people that end up losing family life or relationships, or they lose their business because acknowledging what is actually important, what they need to be balancing, and investing into all of those buckets doesn't end up happening. It's something I still struggle with. I have to be very active with what I'm balancing, what are the priorities, and not letting all of the other individual things slip in that are taking time away from what I actually want to be balancing, because we all have a finite amount of time, resources for that balancing. And if we're trying to balance the wrong things or focus on the wrong things, it doesn't matter. I don't think you're going to be balancing actively things that are not moving your life in the direction it's supposed to be going.
Which is not a great position to be in,
No.
where it feels like you're really busy and you're juggling all these different things, and it feels like you might be making progress, but if you don't have some objective measure of that, people do get caught up oftentimes doing the wrong things. And that's because they don't have their priorities in check.
100%. I think that checklist mentality of, oh, I'm going to checklist these things off versus the 20,000 foot view of, am I doing something that's working smarter and not harder? That phrase can be manipulated, I think, because you do have to work hard. But if you are working on the wrong things, then like you could be working really hard at developing a business that is failing. And it's kind of funny, I've seen multiple examples of this. Over the past week is Blockbuster as an example, like a company that was at the top echelon of where they were at. And I don't imagine people stopped working hard at Blockbuster, but they were trying to balance, focus on the wrong things. And then obviously Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. So that plays a big part in your balancing of life as well.
Yeah, you gotta, like we've talked about before, you gotta recheck and make sure you're still headed down the right path and make sure you're going where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that road is still in front of you.
Yep.
Which in Blockbuster's case, they should have seen the detour signs, man.
Yep. So for you in your life right now, what does that act of balancing entail for you?
Yeah. So we are going into wedding season. So that has changed a little bit. So some context or backstory, Lauren and I do wedding videography and photography. We started that while we were still at the gyms, and people book weddings really far out. So we are in the process of kind of throttling that back down a little bit, but we have at least one more heavy season of that. So for me, that's making sure that I stay on top of some of those edits and don't get completely buried like I did last year. So fitness is still a huge priority. So we're going in the mornings so that nothing gets in the way of that. And then from there, it's just basically allocating the free time that I do have to getting those edits taken care of sooner rather than later. But we're kind of transitioning from some of my efforts being towards the wedding side, most of my efforts being towards Moss Marketing Group. I'm trying to shift all of that towards Moss Marketing Group so that I'm not in that situation where I'm balancing so many different things.
Speak on that a little bit, because nobody's getting any less busy in life. Mm-hmm. I think whether you take somebody that's uber successful, you take somebody that is living in a trailer park, and nothing against people living in a trailer park, but let's use a surface level example that's not as successful.
Yeah.
Everybody's busy, right? Unless you're in jail. you might have a balanced life if you're in jail. But what are the differences with successful people in their balancing of life versus non-successful people?
I think a lot of it comes down to the things that they're not doing. Like, it's not necessarily how much more you can cram into your schedule, but it's saying no to things so that your schedule stays open, whether that's for recovery or for new ideas or just for a deep work state. I think too many people, myself included, try to bite off more than they can probably handle, and they're just spreading that attention and energy across too many different planes.
Got it. And for you, what are the things that start to go when you start losing your balancing act of life?
For me, so far, it's more so just been the lack of like fun activities or time. If I'm hanging out with friends or something like that, and my mind is still like, oh, we still have a bunch of stuff to do, I struggle with that a little bit. So for me, the thing that goes first is those recreational type activities, because I just don't find the time for it or make the time for it.
Yeah.
What about you? What are you the most apt to drop the ball on, so to speak?
And that is one. And I'm at a reflection period of life of like looking at, getting to be 29, and there is this season of growing professionally, which I feel like a lot of people waste in their 20s spent on other things. I think that there's nothing wrong with traveling. I've done quite a bit of traveling and going and doing those things. But for me, it's the balancing act of really doubling down on professional growth, building up the requisite skills, delivering with clients, and building up this base so that as I continue on in life, like I've got this built up, where I feel like a lot of people will either put that on the back burner because they're partying for most of their 20s. On the flip side of that too, though, not being so wrapped up in that my relationships end up failing. My friends are no longer present, and I don't do anything that I used to do from a passion standpoint because, there are also those people. There are coaching programs out there that work primarily with busy executives that all they do, they look at their life now and all they do is work, right? And life has taken a back seat, and at the end of the day, if you're going to be dead in the next 50 years and all you're doing is working, there's got to be something there. And that's where I think the balancing of how do I optimize professional growth while at the same time continuing to travel and having that mindset and developing like autonomy. Like for me, getting to a place where I can work from anywhere and just going and doing stuff, going on those trips, because I find myself less and less like going on these trips when I know that there's things to be doing, when at the end of the day, it's more of a limiting belief and I could still be doing these things while I'm there or prioritize getting it done. So for me, it is some of the fun things like you just mentioned. Hobbies, I think I've let atrophy a little bit.
What are those?
Right? Well, yeah, what are hobbies?
Man, Lauren and I were just talking about this the other day. Like we randomly had an open evening that doesn't happen super often. And we got home and it was like after we had both worked. So we're like kind of tired. She works here at MMG as well, for those that don't know. So we have a really similar schedule in that regard. And we were like, man, we need to find some hobbies of things that we like to do together so that you don't have the, oh, what are we going to do tonight type conversation.
Yes. I feel like you look at why you're doing things, you're living this life. Honestly, like nobody finds a person that just works interesting.
Yeah.
And how many opportunities does that also open up? Just being a well-rounded person and like living, are you familiar with Ernest Hemingway, the author?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a really cool article I read about his T model shape of life.
Okay.
Because Ernest Hemingway, and maybe he wasn't the greatest person, but he's got a super interesting life. It's really interesting to read about, but because he was super good at writing and being an author, right? And so that was like his vertical axis,
okay,
of where he had the things that he did professionally that he was really good at that were what it drove up his career. But his baseline for things and his width of life was super vast. He would go on like 6 months trips to Africa, like on safaris and hunting trips. He had places in like Montana and Cuba. He was a boxer. He was in the military. He was a skier. Like all of these things that he did outside of it, and he would go spend years or months in these different locations and traveling, and he just lived life. He would go into Europe, he would go to Africa, he had places in Montana that he would spend time at, and he wasn't like just an author. Like he didn't just sit in a cubicle or sit in his office writing books, and he's one of the most prolific authors of all time. And part of the thing that made him most interesting was the person he was on the back end of that. So for me, it's like looking at life from that lens of, all right, it's really easy for me to get caught up in this day-to-day stuff, but doing the rocking chair test of when I'm 80, like what things do I want to be accomplishing right now? Like what do I want to be developing? What habits and hobbies do I want to be creating? So that you've got stories to tell and things to look back on and things to tell your kids and your grandkids. Because it is really easy. I think with, one, the industries that we're in, being in business, and then two, just the state of the world right now, where, you are trying to get ahead of your competition. You are trying to be a step ahead of other people. But at the same time, I do think that that doesn't have to look like putting all of your eggs just in that basket, because I do think you can reach a point of balancing a lot of different things. And there are people out there, and we both probably look up to those people that are doing that without just the one thing. And whatever that one thing is for you, maybe it's being an athlete, maybe it's owning a business or a job, or just being a parent, whatever that is for you. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. And obviously you should go all in when it is time to go all in on those things. But how do you switch those gears in life? Because it's not the only thing in life, right? I think that's where people get so caught up in, it's a talent almost. Being able to like turn the dial completely down on one thing, like when you're sitting, knowing you've got work to do. And I'm the same way. Like if I know that there's work needing to be done, but it's time with family, I'm not as present. So that's probably another thing that goes on my back burner, is just lack of being present in what I'm doing, because I'm thinking about business. And I think that, man, that's such a great thing to aspire to, is being all in when you're doing that thing, and then switching the gear completely to being all in when it's time to go.
I think there's a lot of people that struggle with that, especially like the high performing CEO, executive type people.
Yeah.
I mean, you see a lot of really successful guys that are still abusing alcohol, abusing drugs, or whatever it is on a nightly basis, because that's the only way they can turn that off. And that's not a good place to be either.
Yeah.
And what have you felt like has helped you kind of be more present, be more mindful, or have you found anything yet?
So I have, and this is honestly a good reminder of things, because I do get away from it, but I had a coach that we worked through some of these things with, because he was one of those people. He was really good about investing into all the buckets between career and his fitness and his faith and his family and doing fun things. And his big premise was, you can't change your mental state until there's a physical state change. So having things that you do that are in place to between those transitions, like transition periods of that, going on walks, for example, like between going from work mode to going to family mode, or vice versa. You're going on a walk, you're doing something that's almost like taking you back out of that mode so that you can refocus and turn the dial back up. Cold plunge. That's one reason I do like cold plunging or saunas. I think that getting your physical state changed with the dopamine that comes from going on a walk or a run or working out, getting in a cold plunge, getting in a sauna. Once you change your physical state, then I think you can change out of whatever mental state you're in, both from shifting to what you're focusing on, but also, if you're having a bad day, if you're kind of down in the dumps and you're worried about stuff, I also think that, and it's a good reminder too, like, as I get in that mode of forgetting about that or not approaching those things, and it's like, change your physical state and then you can change your mental state first. Yeah. What about you?
I mean, walks are huge. I've been trying to, like, when I get home, because I spend most of the day on the computer, whether it's now more so on the sales side, so outreach, having appointments, phone calls, that type of thing. Before I've transitioned into more of the sales side, it was a lot of video editing.
Okay.
And grinding away on a computer. So one of the things that's really good for me is when I get home to go on a walk. Not just to be away from screens, but also, just like you said, it kind of lets you reset a little bit and have that 20,000 foot view. That makes a big difference. I think daily walks is something that everybody should be putting on their checklist.
Right. And are you more of a long walk guy, or do you like dispersing it up into microdoses of like walks, like taking a 10, 15 minute walk?
I'm more of like a 10, 15 minute walk kind of guy.
Yeah.
Or like a couple laps around the block, depending on how hot it is out here. But ideally, a longer walk, I do enjoy.
Yeah.
A little bit more time to clear out your head and work through whatever you're trying to figure out.
100%. I think another thing, talking about what things I have found, I think that the concept of looking at what I need to do and what I need to accomplish versus just going into my day and just trying to get as much done. Because at this point, it's like a never-ending to-do list,
Yeah.
right? There's always going to be stuff to done. Prioritizing those things and time blocking is huge. Because I do think that there is a physiological limit, right, to what we can do. And I do think that, like, for me, like 90-minute time blocks of like going all in, not being distracted. Because for me, I can be pretty ADHD with stuff. And that tends to just drag stuff out. I'm trying to do this and then this and then this, 5 different things at the same time.
Yep.
To where if I have 90-minute focus blocks and then gaps a little bit in between, I feel like I can be way more productive in a 5-hour time period and probably get done what I could get done in a 10-hour distracted time period. So I think that, time blocking and putting the focus in an allotted amount of time and probably getting that nailed out when you have the most brain power for things, or knowing when it's time to transition. Like for me, a lot of the busy work, hopping on a podcast, hopping on calls earlier in the day is better. Like by the time I get to about 7 p.m., like I'm just a marshmallow mentally,
Yeah.
know? So like if I was to sit down and try to film this podcast or hop on a 45-minute sales call, or put together, an in-depth meal plan and be creative with something, I'll just sit there looking at a screen. So being really detailed with getting that done when I'm going to be the most productive, I think that's where it comes down to working smarter, not harder, of like looking at when am I going to be the most productive? When am I not? And how do you operate at 80%, right? How do you get that done and still be really productive and have your days where you're running at about 80% capacity, so that the days when you do have to go to 100%, you haven't been going at 100% for the last 7 days, and you don't have that extra to go. That's a big thing, because I'll try to just push and push and push as much as I can in a day, and then it'll be a setback later on because it's almost like your recovery and your bandwidth is then limited.
You're taking from tomorrow's energy.
It's kind of like the workout concept, that if you're going in and if you're doing every single set to failure, eventually you can't push anymore like on a given day, because you're always like operating at that top echelon of things. And then we can talk about this for whatever it is, emotionally, physically, mentally, with work. I think there's a sweet spot with 80% with what you're doing, so that you've got that 20% bandwidth when you need to call on it, because inevitably that's going to happen, right? Professionally, as you're growing things, there's going to be days where you got to give 100% all out. But if you're doing that all the time, like you can't be at 100% all the time. And that's one thing that, man, we can't out caffeinate. We can't out.
We can try.
We can try, but
no.
I mean, does it ever work for you?
No, not once.
I keep trying.
I keep trying.
I'm like, man.
I'm thinking maybe 2 gorilla minds. Maybe that'll do something. Different.
Yeah.
No, I think on the working smarter, not harder part, you can get the same amount done in less time if you allocate your time better. And just like you were saying, if you, for me, I'm the same way. My head's a lot more clear in the morning and I can work faster by the time the afternoon rolls around. And maybe that's partially diet related, but by the time the afternoon rolls around, I don't know if it's because we've had so many distractions, so many things come up, but like by the end of the day, I'm like, I can tell that I'm not as productive as I was earlier in the day.
Are you usually trying to do extra work at night too? And you're just sitting there going to like a fifth of the speed or capacity that you would
100%.
I do too.
And it's like, if you just stop doing that and plan it out better so that you can operate at the times when you actually have the energy and clarity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
If you take advantage of those times and don't just waste it, then you wouldn't need to be working in the evenings. As long as you have the realization that when you free up that time, do something that recharges you or that you enjoy, and not just cram more work in there.
I think it's a big thing too, like recognizing that.
Yes.
And establishing those habits quickly. I was listening to a Alex Hormozy training on the way here, and they talked about a couple interesting points with that, because using the analogy of growing and scaling business, but it can be applied to life with looking at, if you're trying to go from a certain amount per month like as a solopreneur, you can do that. But once you get to that bigger goal and you have, those aspirations of what you could be doing, you've got to eliminate, automate, and delegate. And thinking about those things both from a professional standpoint, but then also in life, like what are the things you don't like doing that you're still doing that could be either eliminated or delegated? And what are the things that you're not good at that you can do? And I've been thinking about that like for my own life. Like what are the things that I'm still doing that just drain that battery for me, that are taking away from balancing life in other aspects? And that's a big deal too, I think.
What are some of the big ones that drain your battery?
I think for me, it is a lot of the things that are not directly fulfillment of coaching, like in my business, and sales stuff, like the front end stuff, all of the administrative stuff, which is where like an assistant is probably needed for that has to, bookkeeping things, things that are very monotonous, that are not front end business related, or the outreach side of things, because I do enjoy those things. But for me, it's like getting to that threshold point where if you're focused on everything, eventually something is starting to suffer,
Yeah.
And in terms of like life stuff, it's some of the little things with, because we just bought a house. So, all the little things start adding up, and I do enjoy those things. But when you're doing every single household thing, dishes, all those things that start catching up, I mean, at some point, man, you got to start figuring out ways of like automating and eliminating some of those things.
Because the real difficult thing about the household side is that stuff's all going to be there tomorrow too.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not getting that far ahead of it.
No.
So you have to have a good system in place for that.
Yeah. Have you developed that yet?
I haven't. No. Right. Right now it's like, so we kind of have an interesting situation where Lauren and I started living together pretty young. So our first time officially living together was our sophomore year of college.
Yep.
We moved into a quadplex. So like we've in a way sort of grown up together over the last 11 years almost.
Mm-hmm.
And our living patterns hadn't necessarily caught up to that. So like we were used to living with roommates, house is kind of a mess because you have roommates and it's like, well, I'm not going to clean up after them.
Yeah.
So we finally cleaned that up where like the house is much more in order.
Mm-hmm.
But what that looks like right now is before I go to bed, I like get everything situated so that in the morning when I get out of bed, it's like, nice, relaxing house to step into, which is awesome. I don't have a real good system for it yet though.
I think that's a continually evolving thing. On the like nutrition side of things, for me, it's like, how do we make things more convenient? Because now having a baby in the mix that we got to get ready, take to daycare, spending time with playing and stuff like that obviously starts playing into, you've got another 30 minutes every single evening of like cleaning up a kitchen.
Yeah.
Getting food ready, recipes, cooking, in the morning and stuff. So like doing things that are more convenient, that are more grab and go, like for both of us, it ends up being a big time saver, even though it's more of a simple thing.
Yeah.
Send out outfits, when you get up and getting ready to go to the gym, like all those small things I notice are beneficial. And this is one thing we should probably talk a little bit more about.
So the outfit side though, I feel like setting it out the day before, that goes into a little bit of at least for me, I said I was more productive in the mornings.
Yep.
When I first get out of bed in the morning is not a good time for me to wander through with my flashlight trying to find clothes.
Yeah.
Like it takes me 2 minutes. If I lay it out the day before, it can easily stretch out to 15, 20 minutes if I don't have it laid out. Yeah.
Yeah. I think recognizing those things for you of like, what are those small things that are maybe inconvenient at the time, but they save you a lot of mental bandwidth and time on the back end of things. Like maybe it's prepping the coffee so that you've got time in the morning to just sit on the couch and get your mind right if you need to. For me, like this morning before I head to the gym, like simple things like I just buy hard-boiled eggs that are already prepped. It's not that hard to hard-boil eggs and peel them and do that, but picking up the packs from Costco or Walmart of already made hard-boiled eggs where it's just grab and go, because I mean, at this point, like saving 15, 20 minutes equals a lot throughout your
Yeah.
course of the day as you start getting into this. So for some people, if you're still in college and you can do a lot of these things, or if it's a priority, then by all means do them. But recognize in those places in your life where maybe you could automate or delegate, make things a little more convenient, I think is versus fighting against it, right? Because we all just want to like push against something that doesn't need fought against versus just finding a better route to go with the balancing of it.
I think that would solve a lot of people's problems. Why is it so tough to do that? Like, why do people have a hard time taking a step back and just reconsidering the way that they are doing things?
I think so. Another Hormozy quote from that podcast that I was listening to was this: is that with habits, with getting new things or putting new things in place, whatever it is, physical, habit based, we're always like, oh, we'll put that in when we have time for it. We'll get something nicer when we can afford it. Like, let's take his example was a couch, for example. We're going to go buy a $50 couch and we'll get a nicer one, later on. Like, let's just get something to get us started. And 5 years later, you still got that shitty couch that's still sitting there. And you're like, and it's the same thing. Like if you hire somebody that might be cheaper, but they're just crappy, and you've spent the last 5 years in your business because it became inconvenient for you to do it, versus developing the right habits in the first place, putting good systems in place that maybe you pay a little bit more for. But once we get into the mode of things, like it's just inconvenient changing that, whether it's hiring somebody, changing up your lifestyle habits. I don't think there's like, you probably shouldn't focus on necessarily fixing that. It should be more like do what should be done right off the bat versus having to do that. Cause we're all just by nature that way.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure that there's stuff that you buy. We're like, oh, we're going to get a nicer one later on. And you still haven't got that nicer thing yet.
Yeah.
Or done X, Y, and Z, or taken something out of your house. We all have something with that. So I think that like just doing, like setting yourself up for success right now versus, oh, I'm going to do that later on. That's probably it. That's
thinking ahead a little bit.
Thinking ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thinking ahead a little bit. So that'd be where I'm at on that. Where are some things though? Let's cap it off with talking about where you feel like you are good at that balancing of life compared to most people, like either your age or in general.
I think making fitness a priority is a huge one that I've done a really good job at macro wise throughout my life. Year or two ago was not doing an awesome job of it. So getting that corrected, and just for me on the fitness side, it's just go in the morning before work so that nothing comes up and nothing interrupts your day. That's been huge for me. And I think that's, if I didn't have that staple or that foundation of fitness, it would affect a lot of the other aspects of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you do a really good job of balancing?
So, right, it's hard to say if you do, and you're doing a really good job. But I mean, compared to, because there's always that thing of, oh, I could be doing better. But fitness wise, like I've never let that completely slip out of my life. Right. It's always been a staple in the background, whether it was working out. I've never let myself go more than like a week or two. Right. Everybody falls off the train, things come up in life, but I've never been at the point where I fell off for like a month.
Yeah.
Nutrition wise, again, there's been fall offs, but it's like, it was always relatively good. I've never let myself completely go off of that. Like there was time periods where, business became the focus. And so like I would get to the end of the day and I'm like eating a rotisserie chicken and microwave rice because I haven't eaten for the last 6 hours because I had 7 appointments. And it's like, not the best, but I still always had a consciousness about it. Like there hasn't been a day I haven't taken like my supplements in probably 5 years. I travel with them. I bring them with me. From a relationship side of things, even though I don't always do the best at like, all right, making this a super meaningful, detailed date night, me and my wife have had a date night dedicated where nothing or nobody's interrupted that for the past year and a half. I mean, even when we had the baby, we were in the hospital, like I still went and got dinner and we came back and we're watching a movie on my phone. Like we still have a date night. Like when we got the house, maybe it was like dedicated to us going to the store and getting stuff, but it was still like our date night where we still went out, we did something together, and it's always a Wednesday night. If we need to move it to like a Tuesday, we do it. But I'm still always having somewhat of investment into my relationship with that. So I think between that, faith-wise, going to church every single Sunday, praying at night. From a balancing aspect, like those are things that I do well. Like I'm pretty consistent. When I fall off, I don't let it be a long-term thing. I usually jump back on the horse, even if I do fall off for a couple of weeks.
And a tactical step that people can go out into the world with, schedule those things. We've talked about this before. Schedule those things first on your calendar so that then the work is going to fill all the gaps. It's like the analogy of putting the rocks in and the sand and the pebbles and the water into the jar, and putting the big stuff in there first, and all the other stuff can filter down. Because if you start by, these are the work things that I need to do, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to fill up your whole calendar just by doing that.
100%. And whatever it is you're trying to prioritize in life, for most people, like work, right, ends up just being the biggest priority. But until you make everything else that you are trying to shore up, fitness, relationships, your faith, until that becomes as important as your work, maybe you don't need to dedicate as much time to it. But until it becomes as important as your job or as your work, you're never going to have the progress that you want with it. Right? Like you look at people like fitness wise, like, oh, why can't I get into shape? It's like, well, are you showing up for it like you do your job? Are you giving it that amount of effort? And if not, there's your answer kind of right there. So
I like it. This was a good episode. I enjoyed it.
I did too.
A little bit shorter one, but I've got a meeting coming up. And just like you were just saying, people make time for work stuff. You just got to treat everything that's a priority like that.
Yeah. 100%. This is good. All right, guys.
We'll catch you next week.
Till next week. Peace.